Hello, I am making a video right now where I am basically going to go over the notes that I took when I listened to this podcast, the first episode of the Lifespan podcast with Dr. David Sinclair. This one is called The Science Behind Why We Age. The reason I take notes is because I deal with mysterious health issues, some kind of chronic condition, all kinds of symptoms, and I want to learn as much about the body that I can, much about aging as I can, and hopefully either fix as much as I can the chronic conditions that I have. So, I took notes and I am going to go over those because maybe that'll be useful to somebody. I don't know. So first thing, I'm not going to go over these from top down. I'm just going to kind of skip around. But the first thing I want to cover is the 3 longevity gene categories. So the first one that he goes over is called mTOR. M is for mammal. TOR is for target of rapamycin. So mTOR is a longevity gene that makes a protein that senses amino acids. An example that he gives in the podcast is that when you eat steak, your mTOR activity is activated, and mTOR says, got lots of protein, I'm gonna make muscle, gonna burn energy. And that's kind of why you build lots of muscle from eating steak. But this is actually not a good thing. You want your mTOR levels low. When you have low mTOR activity, that's when you get the longest lifespan. So mice, when they were given a drug called rapamycin, which is used to suppress the immune system. So when they were given that in low doses, they live much longer. Basically, low activity of mTOR is a sign that times are tough. Not enough food, you need to hunker down and build a stronger body. And this is actually very similar. This is a concept that they also introduced in the podcast that is above. It's called Hormesis. It's basically what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that's a very common pattern in all of this, in longevity in general, is when you activate these things that, you know, they put a little bit of stress, not too much, but they put a little bit of stress on your body. Over in the long run, it's actually better for you. So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Okay, and also, so mTOR it doesn't just make mice live longer. If you give rapamycin, well, I guess specifically it talks about rapamycin here, but rapamycin works with mTOR. But yeah, if you give rapamycin to a yeast cell, a fly, or a worm, they all live longer. All these longevity genes they all work the same in all living organisms. Well, there's probably slight differences, but for the most part, they work the same. So you'll see online a lot of people take rapamycin. I said that funny. A lot of people take rapamycin, but of course there needs to be more research before we know for sure. But I can say that David Sinclair, he's pretty confident about everything I'm saying here. I wouldn't say that I'm confident about it. I trust him, but that doesn't mean I have 100% trust. I tend to think in statistics in my brain. So it's like, I have high trust in what David Sinclair says, but that doesn't mean I necessarily 100% believe it. I'm more biased to trust him. So take what the stuff I say with a grain of salt. But when I'm reading this, I'm going to act like it is true, because these are kind of notes based on what he was saying. So he summarized mTOR, and the way he summarized it was, he said, responds to amino acids. So I thought that might be a good way to remember it. And I don't know if that'll help me remember it or not. Alright, continuing on. So that's mTOR. AMPK is the second longevity gene. Stands for, I don't remember what AMP stands for, but AMP Activated Kinase. Basically, you want more of this. You want to activate it. You do this by eating less, fasting. It makes it so that your body is more sensitive to insulin. It basically sucks the sugar out of your bloodstream, which can be toxic if it stays high. Also, it ramps up the energy producing centers of the body. These, the membrane filled bags that are actually ancient bacteria living in our bodies, which you probably already know is called mitochondria. And so a drug called Metamorphin uses AMPK to slow down aging. Lots of people take this. But the reason for that is because most people know it as type 2 diabetes / high blood sugar drug. But it's a super safe drug, according to David Sinclair. And I remember he said in the podcast that there was a study done, and two groups of people taking this drug for diabetes, and another group that was not taking it. And they're the same age, they're older people. And the people that actually had diabetes and were taking this drug actually lived longer. Don't know how credible that study is, but I find that super interesting, and that would provide further proof for what Metamorphin is doing when it's using AMPK. I feel like I've learned deeper about how this works. But anyways, it says AMPK is a sensor for energy, and low energy is a good thing for longevity. AMPK acts as the central regulator. It'll even down-regulate mTOR and activate other longevity genes. Okay, that makes sense. So it sucks sugar out of your bloodstream. It ramps up the energy-producing centers of the body, the mitochondria. I don't know exactly what that means, ramps up. I guess that's what happens when you activate it. Metamorphin uses AMPK to slow down aging. Which I assume that means it increases it. It activates AMPK. And then also, AMPK is a sensor for energy. And low energy is a good thing for longevity. That part doesn't make sense to me. Oh, no, that makes sense. So, I got a little confused there. So you activate AMPK by eating less, which means you have lower energy. Okay. And that's a good thing for longevity. That makes sense. And then also AMPK acts as a central regulator, and it can regulate other longevity genes, which is super interesting. Okay, third, we have the sirtuins, which is family of 7 genes related to longevity. Actually, I gotta get rid of that part. That part's not right. So yeah, family of 7 genes related to longevity. Stands for SIR stands for Silent Information Regulator, and the meaning of the name is basically silent means packaging of DNA. Actually, before I explain this, let me explain a cell and DNA. I don't have all the knowledge, but I can explain from what's there right now. So basically, you have a cell. I believe inside the nucleus is where the DNA is. The DNA is like... So the DNA is all packaged up. It's all tight and packaged up. But if you were to unpackage it, the DNA in one single cell is 6 foot long. So if you took all the DNA in all your cells, that would be from here to the moon, maybe further. But basically, I'm gonna introduce this now. So there's a thing, I'll get back to this, I promise. There's a thing that scientists say is, or predict, is the main root, or one of the roots, of aging, and the root of all diseases, and it's called X differentiation. So where's that at? Here it is. So X differentiation is the unpackaging of DNA in a cell. So you can think of like a broken VHS tape. Basically, it's supposed to be packaged all nicely, but when it gets unpackaged, and then the thing that reads DNA can no longer, it's only supposed to read like a specific part of that DNA for each cell, but if it gets unpackaged, it starts reading all different parts, and it's like, I don't even know what I'm reading here. So let's see, what did I say here? So it's when the genetic info of a cell, such DNA, is popped out like a broken VHS tape, instead of being tightly packed and only showing part of the DNA to be read. Each cell should only allow to be read small portion of the 6-foot wrapped up DNA, but when the cell fails is when it can read a lot of the DNA. This makes the cell, this part's important, this makes the cell confused to what it is. It becomes more of a general cell instead of a brain cell, skin cell, whatever it is. Your brain cell may think it's a kidney cell, and that is not good. That's kind of the important part. It's when your cell becomes more general. So you don't want your brain cell to think it's a kidney cell. That means your brain is going to stop working. That's literally what Alzheimer's is. Which I was going to cover that later, but yeah, that's what Alzheimer's is. It's when this aging process of X differentiation is happening in your brain cells, and they're becoming, the DNA is unpackaging, and it's becoming more of a general cell than a brain cell. I don't know if that's fact, but that's how I understand it at the moment. Okay, so back to this. So, SIR, Silent Information Regulator, the meaning of the name, so silent, means packaging of DNA. It's silencing the bad parts of DNA. It's keeping it so the cell has an identity. It knows what it does. If it's a brain cell, it should not become a kidney cell. And I think that's pretty much what I'm saying here. You don't want liver genome in brain. And then, so that's what silent means. Silencing the bad parts of DNA. Information is the DNA. Yeah, so that's what silent means, and then it's information regulator. So information is the DNA, and they regulate it. So just like AMPK, this family is an important central regulator for longevity. I mean, they all are. Fasting and exercise activates sirtuins. Sirtuins are part of the spooling process, or the packaging process. They bundle DNA/info into cells, which is super important. So the sirtuins are actually the ones, or part of it, that does that process. So you can see why it's a silent information regulator. Three of the 7 sirtuins exist in the nucleus to control the packaging process. So, pretty much, I don't know if this is fact or not, but we think that X differentiation is due to malfunctions in the sirtuins, because they're supposed to be packaging the cells, making sure that brain cell doesn't become a liver cell. However, if the sirtuins stop working and they're not doing that job, then X differentiation is happening, and there's a malfunction in the sirtuins. That's my understanding, based on the podcast. So those are the 3 longevity genes: sirtuins, AMPK, and mTOR. We also went over Hormesis. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Good thing to remember, because that is key to increasing health span and lifespan. I just noted this myself, that the three longevity genes all can be used in certain ways to slow down the bad aging process, which that main bad aging process is X differentiation. Just talked about that. So another thing they talked about was how to measure biological age. Before I talk about that one, I want to talk about diseases. So they think that all diseases and aging are caused by X differentiation. So, like I was saying earlier, Alzheimer's is 90% caused by aging. It's caused by the unpackaging of DNA in the brain cells. Brain cells think they're liver cells or some general cell, and they stop working. And then type 2 diabetes is a problem of bringing glucose sugar out of bloodstream and into muscles and brain, which these parts of your body majorly need glucose. If you don't suck the sugar out of the bloodstream, you will have, he called it treacle, which is apparently caramelized protein in your system, which is apparently very bad. I don't know the details of that, but that's what he said. So another way to say that is that glucose attached to proteins is bad. You don't want that. So you can actually measure how much glucose is attached to your proteins using a HbA1c test. This tests how much glucose is physically bound to your hemoglobin, which carries your oxygen. I actually just got one of those tests recently using Inside Tracker. Definitely recommend. High levels of blood sugar predisposes you to many other diseases too. You don't want a lot of sugar in your blood, which I've known that for a long time. In terms of aging, cells that line, in terms of aging and related to type 2 diabetes, cells that line blood vessels that suck glucose out of your system are losing their function. So that's X differentiation. The cells, I'll continue reading this. So there's a gene that sucks glucose from outside to inside cell called GLUT4, glucose transporter number 4. And over time with aging, especially without exercise and good health, your cells lose the ability to make that GLUT4. Sorry, is GLUT4 a protein? Oh, it says a gene. So yeah, over time with aging, your cells lose the ability to make that GLUT4 gene, and glucose will stay in bloodstream for longer, which is toxic. So this is literally X differentiation. The cells, over time with aging, start unpackaging and they become more general cells instead of cells that do their job. And because of this, it makes it so that your cells lose the ability to make GLUT4, and the glucose will stay in your bloodstream for longer, and that's toxic and causes type 2 diabetes and many other diseases. So Metamorphin, which we talked about earlier, related to AMPK, it does the repackaging and teaching of cells to remember how to behave again, which is super interesting. That's literally reversing aging. Literally, we can reverse aging. That's so interesting. Alright, so this is the last thing I want to talk about, which is how to measure biological age and also DNA methylation. So, if you measure the chemicals that control the packing and unpacking of the genome that specifies cell type, there are certain sites on the gene that you can measure. The chemical is specifically called DNA methylation. Let's think about that for a second more. So if you measure the chemicals that control the packaging and unpackaging of the genome that specifies cell type. There are certain sites on the gene that you can measure. So I believe whenever they say gene, that's also the same thing as DNA. So gene and DNA, kind of like the same thing. So I imagine that 6-foot DNA strand, there's certain sites on that DNA strand that you can measure. And the chemical that you're measuring is specifically called DNA methylation. And I remember Sinclair, he said it was super simple. DNA methylation is simply 1 carbon and 3 hydrogens. That's pretty cool. Cells add this chemical to DNA. It sticks to DNA as you're developing in the womb to make a brain cell different from a liver cell. So they have totally different patterns. The chemical on the DNA has totally different patterns. It was added while you're in the womb. That's interesting. So does it get added any other time? Like there's more I need to learn about that. Over time, there are changes to those chemicals that are predictable. They change in a linear fashion. So if I take your skin cell and measure DNA methylation pattern across the genome, which is the 6 feet of DNA. So if I measure that DNA methylation pattern in 1 cell, or in thousands of cells, which is probably even more accurate, I can then plug that into a program and it'll spit out your biological age. Which is so interesting. Because this DNA methylation changes in a linear fashion. So we can literally, and it's consistent across all cells in living organisms. So this means you can literally measure aging. Sorry, this is like hitting me again, like how cool that is. That is fascinating. I like it because it's like a computer program. Like when people talk, and they're like, "Do you understand this?" It's like, I mean, the words came out of your mouth. I don't know if I understand it, but this is like, it's like a math equation. I love it. I mean, there's still a lot missing here that I don't know about, but it's, it's making a lot of sense in like kind of a mathematical way. So, yeah, they talked about how you can use DNA methylation to predict when you will die. And the other guy, what's the other guy's name? That guy. He basically said, isn't that terrifying? But I agree with Sinclair that being able to predict when you will die is liberating, because now we can actually slow aging and we can reverse it. As we were talking about with Metamorphin, which literally repackages the cells and teaches them, like, helps them relearn how to, do their job again. So yeah, we can get that DNA to unpackage less and even repackage to reverse aging. That is just extremely fascinating. Love this podcast. Excited to learn more about all of this. Hoping I can apply it to my own life and not die young. I'm going to continue experimenting with all sorts of stuff. I'm not the type that'll try risky stuff, but I'm just going to try all sorts of stuff. I'm cutting out gluten right now, and it seems to have a great effect. I could be wrong, and I could just be having a good health spell, but we shall see. We shall see. Either way, thank you, David Sinclair, for this new podcast. I'm loving this. I'm learning a lot. And thank you for anyone that watched this. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you learned something. See you next time.